The Rocketeer shot out of the sky and onto your Super NES back in 1992. Developed by Iron Wind Software and published by Bandai, The Rocketeer is based off the popular comic books and Disney movie of the same name. The original Rocketeer comics are inspired by the various matinee serial films that played throughout the 40s and 50s, all of which featured super cheesy adventure and sci-fi storylines and were filled with over-the-top heroes and bad guys alike. The Rocketeer follows this blueprint with your everyday average pilot Cliff Secord finding an experimental rocket pack and using it to fight evildoers and Nazis that are constantly trying to steal the rocket pack for their own nefarious plans. The comic book series itself is a great introduction to the Rocketeer if you're interested at all, with its awesome artwork and writing going a long way in making it a fun, lighthearted adventure throughout. At some point in the late 80s, Disney decided they liked what they saw in those comic books, and in 1991 released the theatrical version to theaters everywhere, where it received mixed reviews and limited box office returns, pretty much marking the end of any future Rocketeer stuff from Disney. It was still popular enough to get its very own Super NES game though, and for the few of us out there that really enjoyed the comics and movie, this looked like everything us Rocketeer fans were clamoring for. The source material is already tailor-made for a video game with its high-flying action sequences that would translate perfectly to home consoles. And really, who wouldn't want to kill evil Nazis while soaring through the skies with a rocket pack on their brand new Super NES? So was The Rocketeer a worthy adaptation of its source material and a nice treat for us fans wanting more of our favorite rocket-propelled hero? Or were we all about to come crashing back down to Earth? Well, grab your favorite experimental rocket pack and helmet, because we're about to see if The Rocketeer is worth rocketing into the skies for. Start up The Rocketeer and you're treated to a brief title screen, and then a cutscene drawn in the style of the original comic books, which is kinda odd since the rest of the game uses the more realistic digitized art style from the movie. Tonal issues aside though, it's time to get into the game and do what every Rocketeer fan has ever wanted to do since they imagined someone flying through the skies with a rocket pack strapped to their back, and that's racing planes around an airfield. Okay, so not the blazing action-packed start you probably expected, but let's give it a chance. Essentially, you're racing around the smallest airfield in existence trying to outpace the other two pilots in a 10-lap race. Yes, 10 laps. You'll need to fly your plane around 3 barriers, one of which is in the background, so you have to angle your plane just right so that it flies into the background toward it, and then angle it just right again so that you can fly back into the foreground for the next barrier. If you screw up even the tiniest bit, you'll run into the barrier, and at that point, you may as well restart the game, since the AI is so ruthless that you've basically got one chance to pull this off. You do at least get a tiny screen at the bottom that you can use to help line yourself up, but using this screen along with what's going on up above is about as bad as trying to land your plane in Top Gun, only somehow less fun. I honestly can't put into words just how awful this whole racing thing is, and after you've had to restart for the 11th time because your plane slammed into a barrier once again, you're already thinking that this maybe isn't the Rocketeer game you wanted to play. And we're not even past the first stage yet. If you're a glutton for punishment, you can eventually get the hang of the awkwardness of it all and win the race to move on to the next stage. So maybe now we'll get the explosive action that we were all expecting. Oh, it's just another race. Yes, the second stage is literally the exact same race, only this time it's 15 laps long. If anyone's ever wondered what it looks like when the developer wants everyone to hate playing a game as much as they hated making it, well, here it is. If you can manage to play through the entirety of the second race and win, you're then informed that it's time to show them what you're really made of and finally break out that rocket pack. You're then ushered into the next level, which is probably the shittiest version of that old G.I. Joe arcade game ever made. Yes, your first taste of non-air racing Rocketeer gameplay is basically just a terrible light gun game, where you have to move a cursor around the screen to shoot at enemies that are constantly popping up over and over again. At the bottom of the screen, you get your life bar and another bar that shows how many enemies you need to kill to finish the stage, which, if you're wondering, is way too many. You also get a fuel bar that you can use to, yes, get ready for this, actually use your rocket pack to fly up off the ground to dodge enemies and collect power-ups. Sadly, this whole shooting section honestly isn't much more fun than the racing stage, due to it being so completely monotonous. The enemies themselves can be hard to see, and constantly moving your cursor around to shoot at them can make the screen spaz out to the point that it actually kinda gave me motion sickness at one point. If you can manage to make it to the end of this hot mess of a stage, then get ready, because the game actually lets you use your rocket pack to fly around with in the next stage, in another air race. No, I'm not kidding. Yes, your reward is again the same race as before, except this race you play as the Rocketeer. At least this time the race is way easy to win, so it's not the biggest fuck you it could have been. If you win, some totally evil guys come in and threaten to steal your rocket schematics and then kidnap your girlfriend, which then sends you right back into the previous shooting stage yet again. Only this time it's even more annoying, since the enemies now have grenades. You're also treated to a boss once you kill enough enemies, but the only strategy you need to beat it is to make sure you're pressing the fire button faster than it can shoot at you, since you have absolutely no way of dodging its attacks. Sadly, this is still the most exciting thing that's happened in the game so far, though that's not really saying it's any fun. If you can beat the boss, then the game seemingly finally has mercy on you and actually lets you do what you've been wanting to do since you turned the game on. That's right, you can actually fly around and shoot stuff as the Rocketeer. I mean, what you get to do that in is probably the worst 2D shooter you've ever played, but at least it's not another air race. Yes, the game finally pulls out its next tour de force gameplay style with a side-scrolling shooter for Stage 6, and if you've ever played a shmup before, then this will at least be familiar and somewhat playable for you. You can move around the screen to dodge everything coming at you along with using your pistol to shoot things. Unfortunately, since this is a soulless husk of a game, you can expect to have zero fun doing any of that. The Rocketeer is a large target, and moving around feels slow and imprecise. This makes dodging the constant barrage of shit that's coming at you from all over the screen nearly impossible. At some point, it just starts to feel more like a battle of attrition than using any actual strategy. Just a means of brute forcing your way ahead and then praying a health pickup comes along so that you can continue taking damage and moving forward. It's a boring, slow-moving, awkward, controlling mess, and it goes on and on and on for what seems like an eternity. No, seriously, I timed this. This stage lasts for nearly 10 minutes. 10 minutes of doing this. And hey, guess what you get to do if you make it past this marathon of awfulness? The exact same thing. If you're not crying yet, then I'm not sure what it would take at this point. Yes, the next stage is the same crappy 2D shmup that you literally just played for 10 trying minutes. Only this time you're in a plane that's somehow even less fun to control than the Rocketeer was. As expected, this level is also no fun at all and is just as comically impossible as you could imagine it to be. It's at least a bit shorter than the last stage, though that's still way too long. Once the flying sections are over, seemingly an hour later, the game decides to switch gears yet again, and now it's time to introduce the most awkward beat-em-up in the history of gaming. Yes, the Rocketeer has saved its ace up the sleeve for the final act, which now sees you fighting evil rocket enemies on the tail end of a Zeppelin. If you thought the previous gameplay styles all looked awkward, then wait until you get a chance to play this stage. You basically need to punch, block, and dodge your way past each foe that comes down at you, slowly making your way to the ladder on the right side of the screen. And as you can imagine, the whole process of actually hitting them and dodging attacks may as well be a dice roll every time you press a button. Taking each one out isn't very hard on its own, but the main challenge is trying to beat them up while this asshole up here is constantly throwing bombs down at you, which do massive damage if they manage to hit you. Making it over to the ladder is literally left up to chance, since it's just a matter of how many of those bombs actually hit you before you can get there. And since where he throws them seems to be completely at random, you'll just have to pray that you can make it to the ladder with enough health to finally trigger the last boss fight. If you can, then this part has you climbing to the top of the Zeppelin and engaging the boss in yet another completely awful fistfight before the Zeppelin goes up in flames. If Lady Luck is on your side yet again, and enough of your punches connect, you'll be able to save the girl and escape just in time, and thankfully, that's the end of the Rocketeer. Congratulations, you just beat one of the worst games ever made. You know, people sometimes ask us why we do reviews of bad games. I mean, why waste our time with games that probably had less effort put into them than the actual review that we do of it? Well, sometimes it's best to remind ourselves that the rose-tinted past wasn't quite as rosy as what we sometimes remember, and some games are worth dredging up now and again to do just that. For me, The Rocketeer is that game, and was a complete waste of what little money I had to actually rent games with back when I was a kid. So imagine the disappointment I experienced when I spent my hard-earned $4 on what you just witnessed in this review, and had to deal with it until I could return it 3 days later. I actually sat down and tried to force myself to enjoy The Rocketeer, just because I didn't have anything else better to play. But as you can see, no one can have anything close to enjoyment when playing this game. The Rocketeer is truly one of the worst Super NES games you can play. It has almost zero redeeming values from beginning to end, besides maybe trying to put multiple gameplay styles into a single game. Unfortunately, it just makes the game an even bigger mess than it would have been if they would have maybe just stuck with just one. So no, I don't recommend anyone ever play the Rocketeer for the Super NES under any circumstances, unless you just maybe want to force a friend to play it and see how long they'll last until they punch you in the face for subjecting them to it. It's definitely best to stick with the movie and comic books here if you're at all interested in this unique superhero. But do yourself a favor and rocket yourself far, far away if you ever see this game.